everyone. Welcome to join us in this 25th COVID Town Hall. We are going to be talking about COVID and our immunity today. And joining us will be Dr. Choo. 歡迎各位參加我哋今日嘅講座。咁我咧就係劉雪艷啦，係呢個加州大學舊金山分校醫療中心嘅亞裔健康研究院嘅主任。My name is Diana Lau. I am the director of the Asian Health Institute at UCSF Health. With us today is our speaker, Dr. Eugene Choo. Dr. Eugene Choo is an assistant professor at UCSF at the Department of Allergy and Immunology. 咁今日同我哋嚟呢個講座嘅嘉賓咧就係 Dr. Choo。Dr. Choo 係一個韓國人嚟嘅，咁所以係冇中國名嚇。佢咧就係加州大學舊金山分校醫學院嘅助理教授，喺呢個過敏同埋免疫學系嘅。佢嘅專科咧就係做呢個過敏症嘅，但係對呢個免疫系統咧係有相當嘅認識。So what we're going to do today is that we'll do a little introduction to give you a COVID update, and then Dr. Choo will start with some basic immunology concepts, plus what is not on the slide is also that he will talk about COVID and our immune system. And then at the end, we'll entertain your questions. So 今日嘅講座咧就係分開三部分啦，就係一開始咧就係同大家簡短咁跟進係而家呢個奧米克戎嘅新冠肺炎嘅疫情啦。咁跟住咧就係Dr. Choo 咧就會同你哋講呢個免疫學嘅一啲基本嘅常識啦，同埋咧就跟住咧就佢會繼續介紹呢個免疫學同埋而家呢個我哋打疫苗啊同埋呢個肺炎嗰個關係啦。咁跟住咧就會同你哋做啲問答嘅。So just to start to give a little update on where we are. This was the picture that I showed you last month, exactly on the same date, on January 24th. And this is today, February 24th, a month later. And so if you look at the total number of cases in the world, you'll see that the cases has jumped from 21,000 new cases to, this is the cases per 100,000 of population per country, for the world population. And so we have jumped from 21,000 per 100,000 to 23, almost 24,000 cases per 100,000. So now this is like almost 1 in 5, right? And you can see that the world is just as red, almost as before. However, the number of new cases has decreased by about 20% already. It's hardly noticeable in here. And there are actually some areas that has turned darker than before. But for the US, which is here, you can see that the color has lightened up. And in terms of death, right now, that we still have 942,000 deaths, so which is quite a bit. So as much as the cases has fallen, because Omicron is so infectious, we are still having a lot of deaths that we have to deal with. So this kind of comparing different countries in the world. And so you see that this curve for the United States it always stay at the top, except for a little bit in the beginning. It has been the top line for the whole time that we have the pandemic. And this one is China. And you can see that it spiked in the beginning, and then quickly it went under control and it has flattened out pretty much. And so obviously some people don't believe the data, but that's the best data that we have. And so we have to take what we have. 咁呢個咧就係美國同中國嘅圖啊。咁正話嗰個圖咧就係你見到全個世界都係紅色嘅，即係雖然而家嗰個病情啊係低咗21%啦，即係比起上個月啊，但係咧喺呢2個月嚟講咧。雖然佢係低咗咧，但係都仍然係好多新嘅 case， 仲仍然係好多人死亡嘅。咁所以咧，我哋而家咧就雖然係鬆懈咗啲，但係其實個風險仲仍在嘅。咁睇呢2個圖咧，就係美國同中國嘅圖啦。咁我哋不嬲都知道話中國係已經係將個疫情控制咗㗎啦。咁美國咧就唔係嘅。咁美國咧就係一路飆升咁樣。咁但係到最近呢個時候咧，佢咧就開始 is hitting a plateau here. In the United States. So we hope that is going to go down It actually has gone down, but it's not showing in this big map because the little dip is so small, it's not showing here. With the rise in Omicron, South Korea and Hong Kong are having major outbreaks. The difference is that South Korea, for some reason, is letting loose on the restrictions on COVID already, and whereas Hong Kong is arming up, trying to hit a dynamic zero policy. So the two places would be interesting to watch in the near future as to what the outcome is, because the policy of controlling the pandemic is so different in the two places, right? So 呢個咧就係南韓同埋香港啊，因為Dr. Choo 咧就係韓國人嚟嘅，咁我自己本身喺香港嚟啦嚇。咁咧，所以咧，我哋對於兩個地方咧都有好親切感，咁我哋又成日跟蹤住睇呢兩個地方做成點咧。咁啊，發覺咧兩個地方咧最近咧就係都係飆升嘅嗰啲 case 啊，但係好奇怪喎，雖然兩個地方一齊飆升喎，但係兩個地方嘅政策咧係非常之不同嘅。喺南韓咧，佢就已經開始係做一個躺平啊、live with COVID 嗰啲咁嘅政策，即係嗰啲關制係通通開放晒㗎啦。咁咧就有得你啲人戴口罩，戴口罩，唔戴口罩，唔戴口罩咁。咁咧就但係香港咧而家咧就開始要做呢個動態清零，要全民去種疫苗，全民去做呢個檢測。咁所以咧呢兩個地方咧就喺不久嘅將來咧就應該係會帶到一啲資料俾我哋睇下佢哋呢兩個政策嘅不同之處得到咩嘅效果。呢個係我哋嘅加州嘅州長嚟嘅，咁佢喺上個星期2月17號嘅時候咧。佢咧就第一個州，全美國嘅第一個州加州就話咧，而家咧就唔係 pandemic 啦，而家叫做 endemic 啦，因為我哋嘅 case number 咧就即係嗰啲新症嘅症狀咧已經係減低咗好多啦，死亡率咧雖然都係仲係升緊啊，但係個新症狀咧就減低，咁佢即係話喺不久嘅將來咧，我哋都應該見到嗰啲死亡率會減低嘅。咁咧呢個咧佢咧就講咗一個新嘅計策出嚟就叫做 Smarter Plan， 咁咧就每個字咧就代表每個 letter 咧就代表一個字嘅，咁 S 咧就即係 shots 啦，即係即係打針啦 ，M 就 mask 啦，戴口罩啦，A 咧就 awareness， 即係個個都要睇住個疫情高就可能個政策收緊啲，個疫情低就可能放鬆啲咁樣嚇，咁然後咧 readiness 就係我哋都係要唔可以話完全唔理嘅，因為個疫情始終係未過噶嘛，我哋而家仲係好多人感染，好多人死亡噶嘛。咁咧就 readiness 咧就係話，我哋都要始終對於啲咁嘅疫情啊，如果再有發生嘅時候，我哋都要緊急應對咯。所以嗰啲醫療嘅物品啊、床位啊、醫護人員啊，即係每一樣嘢咧，同埋疫苗啊、藥物啊，樣嘢都要即係預備好嘅，唔可以等到嚟嘅時候先至措手不及咁嘅樣嘅。咁啊 testing 呢個 testing 咧就非常之重要，就係測試。我哋初初都唔係幾明白點解做測試咁重要咧？咁因為測試咧，你如果測試你知道自己係感染咗咧，你可以開始隔離啦嘛。你開始隔離就唔使感染人啦，所以測試係一個非常之重要嘅環節嚟嘅。但係一路以往啊，都係用嗰個PCR 做測試咧，即係嗰個乙酸測試咧，就要等好耐，等幾日先有個結果嘅，咁就唔得啦。咁所以最近咧最近係因為Omicron 嘅出現啊，佢嘅傳染得咁快咧，就而家咧我哋即係全個美國嗰啲政策改變咗，呢個快速測試咧係一個非常之重要嘅關鍵嚟嘅，所以而家成日都係講 testing。And then E 就 education 啦，就係講嗰啲細路仔翻學啊，細路仔翻學嗰度咧係一個好大嘅拗撬嚟嘅，到底係遙控去學嘅，又或係真係親身上學咧咁。RX 咧就 treatment 就係講我哋啲藥啦，而家到底有咩藥係感染咗之後可以俾我哋用嘅咧咁，所以咧佢呢個7個政策咧就係我哋嘅所謂呢個live with COVID 嘅政策嚟嘅，所以 live with COVID 咧並唔係等於乜嘢都唔做嘅 ，OK 係我哋係有個政策喺度，係可以收緊可以放鬆，係跟住疫情嘅改變咁樣做嘅，但係咪個個都咁咧？就唔係，但係個個都咁嘅話，即係我哋加州係咁啫喎，咁有啲國家咧就佢話一 live with COVID 我放鬆晒啦，英國嗰度話我室內都唔使戴口罩啦。歐洲好多國家都係咁樣樣，雖然個疫情都係仲係好犀利啊嚇，但係佢哋見到個疫情一開始低落嘅時候咧，就已經開始做呢啲嘢，係因為個經濟咧承受唔到，佢哋想盡快開放個經濟。So this is our Governor Newsom, and Governor Newsom is very proactive and less week, on the 17th, he already announced that the pandemic in California has turned into an endemic, and he started outlining a 7-step process for living with COVID, and he called it the SMARTer plan. And each letter stands for shorts, mass, awareness, readiness, testing, education, and treatment. And RX is just a symbol that we use for treatment in medical terms. So we are actually ahead of others. California cases has decreased a whole lot, but we're not out of the blue yet. Far from, as a matter of fact, we're far from it. The death rates are still, high up there and not going down yet. But we expect the death to come down soon. So this is good news that there is another vaccine, the 5th vaccine that sounds very promising, and is manufactured by 2 European companies, Sanofi and GSK. So these 2 companies also are very. It's one of the biggest drug companies in Europe, and so they all also received the award money from President Trump to develop these vaccines. And so very recently, just a couple of days ago, they were announcing some good results to the news, to the media, but they haven't published the paper yet. So we still have to wait for their paper to publish and be peer reviewed. And then, but they said that very soon they will be applying for the European and the US FDA approval. But they haven't done that yet. Okay, they're heading that way. So what they're showing is that they, if people are taking 2 doses, the vaccine actually offers in their studies 100% protection against severe disease and hospitalization. And if the disease is moderate to severe, then they can offer 75% protection. And antibody levels are actually increased by 18 to 30%. So those are very good numbers. So we are eagerly awaiting another vaccine to come out because we don't have enough vaccines yet to cover the whole world. So that's a very quick description of the major stuff that's going on. And in the last town hall in January, we spoke about testing because testing was such an important topic. And so we know that there are 3 things that's driving the pandemic. And one is that you have to have the virus to be there to be transmitted. And then the virus has to be able to infect a host. And then it's up to the host immunity defense to figure out, whether this vaccine, whether this virus would, cause major issues to the host. So we have talked about the testing and we talked about transmissions before. And today we are following this trend and very fortunate to have Dr. Choo here, who is an expert in immunology, to tell us about what is immunology and how that is helping us fighting COVID.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's my pleasure and honor. And as Diana mentioned, I will be talking about immunology and COVID-19 and the intersection between the 2.
咁啊 ，Dr. Choo 咧就話佢今日咧就同你哋講呢個免疫學同埋佢免疫學點樣幫到我哋去同呢個新冠肺炎病毒抗疫嘅。
So this is kind of an outline of the first part of my talk on immunology, the basics of immunology. So first I'll give an overview, and then second I'll talk about what's called innate immunity, and then next I'll talk about what's called adaptive immunity, and then we'll cover what sorts of things weaken the immune system, and then next what sorts of things maybe make the immune system stronger.
Dr. Choo 咧就係正話講就係話會係介紹呢個免疫學俾你聽啦，就係解釋咩叫先天免疫，咩叫適應性免疫，然後有咩嘢係等到個你嘅免疫系統係削弱嘅，有咩嘢係可以增強嘅咯。
Okay, so I just wanted to place a photo here of the Great Wall of China. I felt it'd be appropriate for the Asian Health Institute. And this was started in the 7th century BC to help protect the northern Chinese borders against invaders. And this is kind of just a good analogy for our immune system's job, because our immune system is always having to be ready to fight against invaders who are always wanting to come into our body, into our territory.
咁啊 Dr. Choo 咧就好interesting， 咁佢咧就係話我哋嘅免疫功能啊系統啊，就好似我哋中國嗰條長城咁樣樣，係要嚟抵抗外來嘅敵人入侵嘅。
All right. In terms of just an overview of our immune system, so the basic problem is that human beings we are just too delicious to the microscopic creatures that surround us. And there's very few of us compared to the amazingly huge numbers of them. And basically, these microorganisms that surround us would love to feast on us because we're warm and wet and we're full of nutrients. And the issue also is that human beings, we're a social people and we move around. And so when we get invaders, then we can spread our invaders to other people around us. And so our immune system, as I said, is kind of like the Great Wall. It's always there to try to help protect us from all of these sort of hordes that are constantly trying to overrun our gates.
Dr. Choo 咧就係話呢個我哋人類咧，即係太過美味啊！而且即係我哋個身體係暖啦，有啲濕氣啦，而家身體裏面亦都有微生物中意食嗰啲營養啊，所以啲微生物咧係好中意嚟到侵蝕我哋嘅。但係慘咧就慘在咧，我哋咧就俾佢哋咧就寡不敵眾喎，佢哋係微生物係好多噶嘛，咁我哋人唔夠啊嘛，所以我哋成日都俾微生物入侵嘅。咁咧，而且咧我哋人類咧就中意去同人交流啊，成日去呢度去嗰度啊咁。所以咧，我哋咧係好有呢個能力咧，將呢啲微生物嘅訪客咧係傳俾其他人嘅。咁但係好在我哋有棟長城，每個人都有棟長城喺我哋嘅身體裏邊。咁呢棟長城咧就嚟保護我哋呢啲外來之物嘅微生物嘅入侵。咁好多時咧都可以發揮到作用嘅。
Okay, so our immune system basically has really four main functions. Number one is to create a barrier to prevent the bad guys, the pathogens, from getting into our body. Second, once they get into the body, we need our immune system to be able to identify that this is a foreign invader, that this is a bad guy. Third, once we've identified the villains here, then our body needs to be able to eliminate those villains. And then lastly, number four, our body needs to be able to remember who these villains were and how to fight them so that we'll be better prepared when they come back again.
朱醫生咧就會話我哋嘅免疫系統咧就有4個嘅主要功能。第一就係有一門屏障啦，一門屏障就係阻止呢個病原體入我哋身體嘅啦。假如間呢個屏障係破咗嘅時候咧，咁咧我哋嘅身體咧就有第二個功能啦，就係會認到呢啲係敵人嚟嘅咁。OK， 認到佢哋咧，跟住就做第三個功能啦。既然係敵人，當然同你打仗消滅你啦。OK， 咁咧就跟住第4個功能咧就係我唔止消滅你，我仲記得你，我產生咗個記憶。所以咧就係4部曲。OK， 第一就係屏障，第二咧就係認識你係敵人，第三咧就係打你，跟住咧就仲認得你，記住你。
Okay, so the first part of our immune system is innate immunity, which is really our first line of defense. And the biggest, most obvious part of innate immunity is the epithelial barriers. And so that's including our skin, our respiratory tract, and our digestive tract. And so this is the first part to just keep the viruses, bacteria, fungi out of our body. Second, we have leukocytes, or white blood cells. And these consist of things like neutrophils, macrophages, and something called natural killer cells. Third, we have some proteins that circulate throughout our body, includes various categories, including something called complement, something called collectins, something called pentraxins. And then lastly, we have cytokines. And basically, these are the messenger molecules that our body sends signals from one part of the immune system to another to let us know when it's time to amp up the immune response or time to take it down.
咁咧，我哋係有每個人都有先天嘅免疫嘅，呢個就係我哋嘅第一道防線。咁呢個先天免疫咧就有幾種嘢可以幫到我哋嘅。第一個咧就係表皮嘅屏障啦，就係呢個屏障係由咩形成嘅咧？我哋嘅皮膚啦。 所以我哋千祈唔好整親手整親腳，整親手整親腳咧可能會發炎啊嘛，啱唔啱啊？咁然後咧呼吸道啦，同埋嗰個消化道啦，即係我哋嗰個食嘢嗰條腸啊 ，OK， 由個口腔一路咁樣落嗰度，咁咧呢兩個咧就係亦都係細菌可以入到去嘅 ，OK， 因為我哋呼吸空氣直入我哋個肺啦嘛，咁然後消化道就係我哋所謂嘅就係禍從口入啦，可以係啊，可以食咗啲嘢係整到我哋會有感染噶啦。咁所以皮膚、呼吸道同埋呢個消化道呢三個咧就係我哋嘅屏障，平時咧就係保護我哋唔會俾啲細菌感染嘅。咁然後咧我哋都聽過有白血球啦。咁如果係白血球過低嘅時候，咁我哋就容易感染啦，係咪？咁另外有嗰兩樣嘢咧，就係我哋少聽到啲嘅，一個咧就叫做 circulating proteins， 就係嗰啲循環喺身體裏邊嘅蛋白質。亦都可以同我哋去殺細菌嘅。咁另外一個咧就係 cytokines， 就係呢個細胞因子。咁一路都冇乜聽過呢個 cytokines 呢個字，就直至係因為有呢個新冠病毒引起咗呢個 cytokine 嘅過度嘅反應，咁我哋咧就知道原來都有 cytokine 係幫我哋去打呢個細胞呢個病毒嘅戰嘅咁。
Okay, and then the next big part of the immune system is adaptive immunity. And this is a slower response, but much more specific. And there are kind of a few big parts of this. One is first we have the antigen-specific lymphocytes. And so their job basically is to recognize the microbe when it enters the body. And then the second part is going to be the antigen-presenting cells, or APCs. And once they've recognized a microbe from the antigen-specific lymphocytes, then the presenting cells show what they've seen to these other immune cells in the body and activate them. And then lastly, once the cells are activated, then we have the so-called effector cells. And their job then is to eliminate the threat, eliminate the microbe. And there's really sort of two halves of that. One half is the humoral or B cells. And these are going to basically be factories that generate just tons and tons of antibodies. And these will help kind of grab onto microbes and neutralize them. And then we have the cell-mediated or T cell response. And this is a response where it will directly see if a cell is infected with something like a virus. And if it sees the cell is infected, it will kill it.
咁咧，第二個嘅免疫咧，就係叫做適應性嘅免疫。咁呢個適應性嘅免疫咧，就係慢啲嘅，但係咧係好有針對性嘅對嗰啲病毒。咁咧主要嚟講咧，就係第一就係有我哋身體裏邊有呢個淋巴嘅細胞啦 ，lymphocyte 啦，佢咧就可以認到呢啲外來嘅細菌啦。咁咧佢認到外來嘅細菌咧，就呢個有另外一種細胞咧，就係會將呢啲認到嘅細菌就會話俾其他嗰啲免疫細胞聽話，喂，好醒啊！而家我哋有細菌入侵啊！咁呢個咧就係嗰個 APC antigen presenting cell 啦，抗原呈遞細胞嚇。咁咧跟住咧就有兩種嘅細胞，跟住咧就係兩個細胞咧，我哋成日都聽住嘅，就係一個叫做 B 細胞，一個叫做 T 細胞啦 ，B cells and T cells 係咪啊？咁咧 B 細胞咧就其實咁我哋話有抗體嘅，咁啲抗體點樣嚟嘅咧？就係由 B 細胞做出嚟噶啦。佢咧 B 細胞咧就會話，咁而家我知道有嗰啲細菌入侵啦，咁我而家要做呢啲抗體啦，咁 B 細胞 OK。咁然後咧 T 細胞咧就係話咩咧？T 細胞唔理啦，我唔使即係你做抗體你嘅事啦，我而家你要直接將嗰啲細菌侵蝕咗嗰啲我哋身體嘅細胞啊 OK， 就係將佢消除啦咁。所以咧係T cell 同埋 B cell 咧就係咁嘅功能，一個咧就係製造抗體，一個咧就直情係消滅佢嘅，消滅咗嗰啲感染咗嗰啲細胞。
Okay, so this is just a picture of what it looks like in terms of that innate, kind of the fast, non-specific response versus the adaptive, which is the slow and specific response. So you can see that the innate response on the left-hand side is basically kind of working in the first few hours after you're exposed to some kind of microbe. And so as you can see, the skin sort of being kind of the first line of defense, but afterwards you see the phagocytes, the dendritic cells, complement and natural killer cells. But then after that, the adaptive immunity response starts to really take over. And there you can see that the B cells, as we said, are basically antibody factories, making a lot of antibodies on the top. And then on the bottom, you can see those antigen presenting cells activating those T lymphocytes, and then they become effector T cells, which are going to run around and try to see if a cell is infected. And if it is, then it will have that cell be killed.
咁咧，呢個咧就係個過程係點咧？就係初咧就係我哋嗰個先天免疫能力咧，就係幫我哋嘅先嘅。咁咧就係當有細菌想入侵我哋嘅身體嘅時候咧，喺頭嗰幾個鐘頭，頭嗰12個鐘頭咧，咁咧首先係皮膚嘅屏障啦。如果個皮膚屏障擋唔住，或者係個食道嘅屏障，或者係呼吸嘅屏障擋唔住咧，嗰啲細菌真係入咗嚟啲血裏邊、啲細胞裏邊嘅時候咧，咁咧就嗰啲其他嗰啲白血球咧 ，OK 就會開始去對佢做反應啦。咁然後咧就再唔得嘅時候咧，好啦，咁跟住咧第二層功能啦，嗰個 adaptive 適應性嘅免疫咧就開始活動啦。咁呢個適應性嘅免疫功能咧，就會將嗰啲 B 細胞咧，就會將佢做咗一個抗體嘅工廠啦，要嚟大量咁製造抗體啦。咁或者咧係呢個 T 嘅細胞咧，就要嚟一見到嗰啲感染咗嗰啲細胞咧，就殺咗佢。點解要殺咗嗰啲感染咗嘅細胞咧？因為呢啲你記得嗰個新冠病毒咧，佢係要靠人嘅細胞裏邊嚟繁殖噶嘛。如果你就算殺咗個病毒，你唔將嗰細胞係俾個病毒感染咗細胞殺咗嘅咧，佢咪喺裏邊嗰度一路咁樣嚟到multiply 咯，咁咪製造好多病毒出嚟咯。所以咧，呢個 T 細胞咧就會將嗰啲感染咗嘅細胞殺死咗，等佢唔可以再繁殖。咁就呢個係半日啊，一路即係遲幾日嘅事，所以佢嘅適應性咧係慢啲，佢慢慢去做，但係佢會係做得好好嘅。呢個就係我哋人身體裏邊嘅反應啦。
Okay, so this is a picture of what our adaptive immune system, the T and B cells, do to help our body fight a virus like COVID. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the T cells, or especially in this case, the so-called cytotoxic T cells, they will go around the body, and if they see that a cell looks like it's infected with the virus, it will go ahead and tell the infected cell to actually kind of commit suicide. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the B cells, and as you can see, they're doing their job really, really well here as an antibody factory. So they're making tons of antibodies, which then grab onto the virus, block the spike protein from being able to latch onto the cell and blocking the cell from getting infected.
咁呢個咧就係即係正話講個 T 細胞同 B 細胞嘅造作啦。咁咧你喺左手邊嗰度見到綠色嗰個 T 細胞咧，佢咧就會發布信息咧，就話俾嗰個佢睇到邊個細胞係受咗感染之後咧，佢就發布信息叫嗰個細胞自己去自殺嘅，即係等佢嗰個細胞死亡嘅。咁咧右邊嗰度嗰個 B 細胞嗰個藍色嗰個 B 細胞咧，就係細胞工廠啦。佢咧就製咗好多嗰個抗體出嚟咯喎，係抗體工廠嚇，唔好意思。咁咧嗰啲抗體咧就係藍色嗰啲，好似個 Y 字仔嗰啲啦。嗰啲抗體咧就會走去嗰個病毒嗰度咧，嗰啲刺針嗰度啊，就將嗰啲刺針咧就綁住佢，即係綁住佢嘅腳咁，綁住咗佢咯。佢咪嗰啲刺針係入去嗰啲細胞感染啲細胞嘅地方嚟噶嘛，嗰個病毒嘅地方嚟噶嘛嚇。咁佢綁住咗佢嘅腳咯，佢咪入唔到去咯。佢即係插唔到入去咯，咁插唔到入去，咁即係唔可以感染嗰啲細胞啦。咁即係就算個病毒入咗嚟我哋身體咧，我哋呢啲抗體咧就可以擋住佢，唔使即係我哋冇受感染，就算受感染都冇咁嚴重啦。
Okay, so one question that I often hear is, well, what sorts of things will make the immune system weaker? And unfortunately, there are many, many things. And one of the most important ones is something that unfortunately nobody can do anything about, and that's aging. As we get older, our immune system just gets weaker. It's just a part of life. Frailty is another one. Obesity is another one, and this is a very important one that we've seen, especially in the midst of COVID, where we saw that obesity was correlated with having more severe disease. Smoking is another thing that can affect the immune system and weaken it. Things like excessive alcohol consumption, stress can make this worse. And then many, many diseases can make it worse. And certainly one of the most common ones is going to be diabetes, especially when it's poorly controlled.
咁當然我哋嘅免疫系統，大家都聽過係有時話，佢個免疫系統弱咗啦咁，咁呢啲咧就係弱咗嘅原因啦。最普遍嘅原因就係我哋老啦，越嚟越老啦，跟住又身體虛弱啦，肥啦，或者食煙啦，或者係飲酒過多啦，或者係太大壓力啦。好多人都知道工作壓力太大會病咁啊，點解會病？即係就係個免疫系統弱咗，所以咪會俾啲細菌入侵啊，整到我哋自己病啦，係咪？咁或者其他嘅長期嘅疾病啊，譬如高血壓啊、膽固醇多啊，或者係糖尿病啊，最多即係糖尿病嘅影響係非常之大嘅。
Okay, so maybe that part's a little bit depressing, but there are things that we can do to strengthen the immune system too. And so first of all, one thing that's great is exercise. It helps stimulate cellular immunity. And so exercise is good for many things, but that includes the immune system. Second is sleep. And so studies have definitely shown that periods of prolonged lack of sleep can contribute to getting sick more often, including with infections. And lastly, there's nutrition. And in nutrition, really the first two vitamins there, C and D, are really the most important, but vitamins A, E, and B can also play a role. And then among the trace elements, zinc is the most important, but there's also a role to be played for other elements like iron, copper, and selenium.
咁咧，朱醫生咧就話正話嗰啲話咩嘢可以整低我哋免疫系統功能嘅嘢，太過令到我哋太過depressing， 太過即係唔開心啦。佢話但係咧，另外一樣嘢咧係可以令到我哋開心啲嘅，就係因為有其他嘅嘢咧可以幫我哋嘅免疫系統增翻強啲嘅。咁係咩嘢咧？大家其實都應該知嘅，就係第一就係運動，成日都話運動係嘛。第二個咧就係充足嘅睡眠。所以人哋話如果你瞓唔夠好容易病㗎，咁係咪？咁咧就第三咧就係營養啦，運動、睡眠同埋營養。營養咧，我哋好多人都有講啦。哎呀，我又要食維他命 C、D、A、E、B 啊咁樣。有啲咧就其他嘅微因素啦，就係個鋅啊、鐵啊、銅啊同埋呢個硒。咁咧呢啲微元素咧，喺我身體裏邊咧係會起啲作用咧，係幫我哋個免疫系統強翻啲嘅。但係又唔可以過多啦。但係如果佢過少咧，咁我哋免疫系統又會弱咗喎，所以都係要睇下嘅。呢度應該有朋友可以問問題㗎啦。
Okay, so this is just a nice picture, I think, of a few different big categories of nutrients that can help improve the immune system response, and then some of the common foods you can find them in. I won't go over all of them, but basically you can see that things like kind of a trend here. So like kind of lean meat, seafood, a lot of kind of especially green leafy vegetables, fruits. These are things that generally are going to probably help the immune system. And what you can see is not on here is going to be a lot of things that are very delicious, highly processed foods like cakes, cookies, ice cream. Unfortunately, I wish that helped the immune system, but it probably does not.
咁啊，朱生話咧，呢度呢啲食物咧，係我哋好多時日常嘅食物之中咧，都有好多嗰啲咁嘅維他命 A、B、C、D、E 嗰啲咁嘅元素啦，同埋呢啲嗰啲微量嗰啲鋅啊、鐵啊嗰啲咁嘅元素啦。咁主要嚟講咧，就係我哋平時食嗰啲嘢係已經包括好多呢啲元素喺裏邊噶啦，生果啦、綠色嘅蔬菜啦。同埋瘦嘅肉啊、海鮮啊、牛奶啊嗰啲咁嘅，或者係其他嗰啲蔬菜啦，係咪？咁咧，但係好可惜啦，就係我哋中意好多時貪食嗰啲甜嘢啊、蛋糕啊、麵包啊嗰啲嘢咧，就冇呢啲咁嘅，即係唔係咁多呢啲咁嘅元素喺度咯。所以嗰啲嘢食可以令到我哋食肥，但係咧亦都對我哋免疫力咧係冇咩幫助嘅。
Okay, so that's just a picture of the COVID virus.
咁呢個只係一個嗰個病毒嗰個即係嗰個電子顯微鏡下嘅放大嘅圖嚟嘅。
Okay, so for this next section, I'll go into more detail on COVID, talking about its sort of the structure of the virus, its history, prevalence, symptoms, transmission. Tests we can use for diagnosis, things we can do for prevention, things we can do to treat it, and then lastly, some of the current trends with COVID.
咁我哋而家就會跟住講多啲關於呢個新冠肺炎同埋呢個免疫功能嘅相關嘅事。
Okay, so as an overview, COVID is a member of a group of so-called coronaviruses, and this is a very, very large, very, very widely spread group, and it causes anything from the common cold, which we've all known about for forever, to some of these more sinister viruses that maybe we've heard about and have been afraid of, things like SARS and MERS. And the reason why this whole family is called coronaviruses is because corona is means crown, and it sort of refers to how the virus under an electron microscope looks like it has the same kind of crown that you can see when you look at the sun. The crown around the sun, as you can see on the upper right hand picture. And like all viruses, over time, COVID evolves, and we've seen that with all of the variants that have come out one after the other. In terms of its RNA sequencing, it's shown that it's probably most similar to two types of coronaviruses that are present in bats.
咁呢個只係朱醫生同我哋重溫呢個新冠肺炎嘅同埋呢個病毒啫。因為我相信大家都已經係好清楚佢正話講嗰啲嘢㗎啦，就係點解叫佢做新冠肺炎咧？就係因為佢好似個皇冠咁，然後有嗰啲咁嘅一支支嗰啲刺針出嚟啦，但係中間嗰嚿嘢咧就係一個冠咁樣形嘅。咁咧就呢個新冠病毒咧就係同我哋以前同我哋嘅普通感冒啊，同埋以前嘅沙士啊，同埋嗰個中東呼吸系統嘅綜合症咧嘅病毒啊，係同埋一個家族嘅。都係 coronavirus 嚇，咁咧就當然呢啲咁嘅病毒咧就會隨住時間咁而進化啦，咁而佢哋最近佢哋嘅動物咧就係呢個蝙蝠嘅病毒，蝙蝠嘅冠狀病毒同呢個冠狀病毒咧就最相似嘅。
Okay, in terms of the structure, you can see that there are a few important parts of the virus there, the S protein, HE protein, the RNA, and the middle, the M protein and the envelope. But the most important thing for sort of our knowledge in trying to prevent infection is the S or spike protein. And this binds to something called the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 or ACE2 transmembrane receptor. And this is a receptor that's expressed in many parts of the human body, including the lungs, the heart, the kidney, and also in gastrointestinal tissue.
咁呢個咧就係新冠病毒嘅結構啊。佢呢個結構咧就係一個圓波咁，然後咧出邊嗰度有好多針刺咁懟出嚟啦。咁個圓波裏邊咧就係好多種不同嘅蛋白嘅。OK， 咁但係咧。最重要嗰部分咧就唔係嗰隻蛋白嘅部分，係針刺嗰個部分。咁當呢個刺針咧係喺呢個病毒個表面嗰度時候咧，呢個刺針咧就係入侵我哋身體嗰部分噶啦。咁咧就好多時咧就係同我哋身體裏邊一種嘅接受體啊，叫做 receptor， 叫做 ACE2 嘅 receptor， 即係佢只係好似一道門咁，一把鎖咁係可以俾呢啲針刺咧，可以經過佢道門咁樣入去我哋身體嘅。咁呢啲咁嘅接受體咧，就係喺肺啊、心臟啊、腎臟同埋腸胃道嗰度咧都有好多嘅。咁呢啲地方咧就係呢啲冠狀病毒係可以入侵我哋身體嘅地方嚟嘅。
All right. In terms of just a little bit of a background of the history, we all know it too well, I'm sure, since we've all been living it. But COVID or SARS-CoV-2 was first identified in late 2019 in Wuhan, China, as a cause of some pneumonias there. But then very rapidly became a global pandemic declared March 11th, 2020. And then in terms of variants, there have been a few variants of note that have come down the road. In terms of kind of the biggest ones, the most important ones perhaps, there's the Delta variant, first identified in India in December 2020. And this was shown to unfortunately have both higher infectivity as well as associated with more severe disease. And then most recently, we've had the Omicron variant, first identified in Africa and Botswana in November 2021. And this one seems to be more infectious, but on the other hand, loses a little bit of severity.
咁啊，呢度係佢簡單咁樣講咗呢個新冠肺炎嘅發現嘅過程啦。咁啊，初初咧就喺武漢嘅地方咧，中國一個城市嚇，就係發現咗咧就有一個好特別嘅肺炎出現咗，初初都唔知佢係乜嚟嘅。咁咧到咗嗰陣時咧就2019年年尾嗰陣時啦，就係11、2月度。咁咧到咗過咗幾個月啦，嗰陣時咧。世界衛生組織咧就宣布呢個係一個新嘅冠狀病毒，就叫咗呢個做一個大流行病啦。因為嗰陣時已經傳染得非常之迅速啦，全球。咁呢個病毒初初咧就係由一個 alpha 變種到 beta 變種到 gamma 變種，跟住到 delta 啦。咁啊流行咗1年之後咧，就到年尾嘅時候到 delta 咧。即係2020年12月咧，就喺印度嗰陣時開始首先出現啦。哇！嗰陣時 Delta 一出現咧，就發覺佢傳染性非常之高，而且個引起嘅疾病個肺炎係非常之嚴重喎。嗰陣時係死好多人咯。咁啊 Delta 兜兜轉轉又搞咗幾個月啦，橫遍全球。OK， 咁然後咧就到 Omicron 出現啦。Omicron 咧就首先喺呢個南非呢個國家仔叫做 Botswana。就發現咗先嘅，咁啊跟住佢附近呢啲國家咧，啲南非嗰啲國家就跟住又爆發啦喎，咁咧就發覺咧呢個 Omicron 咧，佢嘅傳染性仲比呢個 Delta 仲犀利喎，傳染得非常之快佢幾倍嘅，咁咧但係咧好在佢嘅嚴重性咧就冇咁高，佢大部分嘅人感染咗咧都係喺個上肺道嗰度，即係喺個鼻同埋個口腔嗰度感染。就好少真係落到個肺個底嗰度嘅，咁嚟到整到有肺炎嘅，咁所以咧佢咧就發覺佢係根據傳染性，但係嚴重性係較低，但係肯定咧就唔係一個普通嘅傷風鼻塞嚟嘅嚇，佢即係佢係亦都死得人幾多嘅，雖然冇死得人Delta 咁多，但係有呢個殺傷性嘅。
Okay, in terms of prevalence, so this slide is already out of date because it was from 11 days ago, but as of February 13th, there were over 400 million confirmed cases around the world and almost 6 million deaths globally. And the overall fatality rate, if unvaccinated, ranged from 0.15 to 1%, but that was definitely very, very highly variable and depended on many factors, including the age of the individual, if the person had comorbidities, a lot of the things that we talked about before.
咁咧呢幅圖就係2月13號嘅時候攞嘅，2月13號而家今日24號，即係11日之前啦，係咪？咁咧就係嗰陣時有4,009萬嘅人咧係感染咗嘅。咁然後咧就有成5.9，即係成有500萬，差唔多600萬嘅人死㗎啦，因為呢個肺炎。咁當然係非常非常之多啦，幾百萬人死亡喎，係咪？咁咧就呢個 fatality rate 咧就係咁樣計法嘅，就係講嗰個死亡嘅人數係喺測驗，即係感染咗、確認咗有呢個新冠肺炎裏邊有幾多人死咗，呢個叫 fatality rate， 唔係同人口喎，唔係話你個國家有幾多億萬人口咁，然後幾多人死咗，嗰個唔係叫 fatality rate， 係你個國家裏邊有幾多人查到出嚟係有新冠肺炎嘅，而喺呢個新冠肺炎之中感染咗嘅人有幾多人死亡咧？咁呢個就睇到呢個病毒嘅嚴重性啊嘛，係咪？即係感染咗，你知道佢感染咗，咁然後知道哇感染咗，原來咁多人死嘅咁。咁通常咧呢個嚴重性咧，佢睇下咩地方啦，就由0.15% 到1%嘅。咁1%好高咯，或者係100個人感染之中有1個人係會死亡喎，係咪？咁咧就呢個就係而家嘅大概情形啦，就係由0.15到1%。
Okay. COVID symptoms, I think we're probably all very familiar with what to look for now. But there are a few things, of course, just as maybe a quick review. So first of all, we can have lower respiratory symptoms like cough, shortness of breath, Otherwise, we can have other symptoms like fever or chills, muscle, body aches, gastrointestinal symptoms like vomiting or diarrhea, and then the loss of sense of taste or smell. The upper respiratory symptoms seem to predominate with Omicron. So it would be more things like nasal congestion, runny nose, that will predominate with Omicron more than the shortness of breath type things that were maybe worse with Delta. And these symptoms will usually start anywhere from 2 to 14 days after exposure. And there are some more major, more concerning symptoms to think about that may push you to maybe consider seeking medical care. And they include really trouble breathing, a lot of persistent pain and pressure in the chest, developing some confusion, being unable to wake up or stay awake, or signs of what we call cyanosis, where basically you're having very pale gray, blue color on your skin or lips or on your nails.
咁呢啲就係新冠肺炎嘅症狀，相信大家朋友都係已經係非常之熟悉噶啦。咁咧就有上邊嗰個上肺道嘅病徵啦，即係好似係傷風鼻塞啊、咳嗽啊，或者喉嚨痛啊嗰啲啦。咁另外有啲咧就係可能係有肚屙啊，或者係作嘔啊嗰啲咁嘅情形嘅。有啲咧就係神志不清啊嗰啲咁嘅。咁咧喺總括嚟講咧，如果係發燒啊，或者係傷風鼻塞嗰啲咧，嗰啲係比較輕微啲嘅症狀咧，就可以自己喺出邊買啲藥食，幫發燒退燒啊，或者幫傷風感冒嗰啲咁藥就可以噶啦。但係咧下邊嗰啲咧，就係比較嚴重啲嘅症狀啦。係咩症狀咧？就係呼吸困難，呼吸困難喎。咁你諗下係幾嚴重咧？係嘛？唞唔到氣，冇氧氣，咁就會死人噶嘛，係咪？咁咧。另外一個咧就係個胸口受痛受壓啦，咁你都唔知係咪個心臟有事嘅，係咪？咁咧一啲咧就係有啲即係個人有啲混亂啊。咁如果個人有啲混亂係咩地方咧？就係個腦啊嘛，即係個腦缺氧，佢咪有啲混亂咯，係咪？咁咧有啲咧就醒唔到啦，又係個腦啦缺氧，咁咪佢即係整到個人係暈暈陀陀咁樣醒唔到啦，或者即係好難保持清醒啦。咁咧就如果個人嗰啲面色啊、嘴唇啊變白啊，或者嗰啲手指甲啊變藍色啊，或者變到好白冇血色咁咧，依個亦都係證明到係嗰個身體裏邊嘅血液循環有問題啊，就可能有啲血柱啊嗰啲咁嘅情況。所以呢啲咁嘅問題咧，你哋大家都知道嘅。總之咧，你如果係有懷疑咧，你就要打電話，唔係即刻去急救室。係去打電話 ，OK， 同你嘅醫生講下，等個醫生教你點樣做 ，OK。咁咧就至於呼吸嗰度咧，好多時我哋UC 咧嗰啲病人咧，好多時咧都叫佢喺屋企嗰度買一個嗰個 pulse oximeter 嘅，即係叫佢買個嗰啲驗血氧嗰個機仔啊，好平嘅啫嘛，夾喺隻手指嗰度，可以查到有幾多血氧嘅。咁如果低過95度嘅咧，就叫佢打電話俾醫生或者去醫院嘅。就算點樣都好啦，你打電話俾邊個都好，醫院又好，醫生又好，你都要首先打咗個電話先，因為佢哋要就算你去睇佢咧，佢都要預防你嘅，因為你可能感染咗啊嘛，佢哋唔想啲病毒傳播噶嘛，所以千祈唔好自己咁周圍走。你而家係一個感染嘅過程之中，你係可以感染其他嘅人嘅，記住呢樣嘢。
Okay. Now in terms of transmission, so as I think we've all been well aware over the last, unfortunately, 2 years, we know that it can mainly come from respiratory droplets. And these are typically expelled when people are talking, coughing, sneezing. And usually those respiratory droplets don't travel that far. They usually travel less than about 6 feet. And this is definitely the most common form of transmission. But airborne transmission, basically the very, very tiny droplets that float through the air and travel for more than 6 feet, this definitely can and has happened, although that usually happens in areas that are poorly ventilated. And in terms of having COVID, contracting it from non-respiratory secretions, things like blood or stool or ocular secretions, it can happen, but it definitely is not the most major source.
咁咧就新冠肺炎嘅病毒傳染嘅方法大家都相當清楚嘅，你應該就係由個口腔嗰度或者係噴出嚟嘅空氣嚟到傳染㗎啦。 咁咧空氣裏邊就睇下個水分有幾多啦。如果你係打乞嗤啊或者咳嗽啊嗰陣時，嗰啲水分咪遠啲咯，咪重啲咯。重啲嘅時候咧，佢就噴唔得咁遠嘅。重啲嘅時候咧，佢就早啲就落地嘅。OK，通常咧就係6尺之內咧，佢即係唔會噴多過6尺咁遠咯。所以我哋話叫你社交距離每個人隔開6尺啊嘛。咁然後咧就呢個，但係如果係我哋呼吸嘅空氣，如果喺一個地方咧，嗰啲空氣嘅調節啊係唔好嘅咧，即係間房好焗啊，嗰啲空氣唔流通啊，即係你噴出嚟嗰啲氣我又吸咗，我噴出嚟啲氣你又吸咗咁樣咧都有呢個感染嘅風險嘅。所以大家都聽到話即係出去外邊咧個感染嘅情況咧係比較低啲嘅，因為外邊嘅空氣流通啊嘛，唔同室內啊嘛。咁室內而家天冷又閂窗咯，咁啲空氣咪唔流通咯，所以感染咧係會增高，所以大家要小心。咁咧另外咧就係話有啲嘢咧都唔係一定係呼吸啊或者噴出嚟嗰啲嘢感染嘅，有啲可能係其他嘅嘢感染嘅，譬如咩咧糞便啦、血啦咁或者係有啲睇唔到血嘅糞便啦，咁都可以感染嘅。但係呢啲都唔係一啲大嘅問題咯。所以我哋係可以，如果查病毒嘅時候咧，追源咧係可以去查嗰啲污水嘅，因為污水裏邊又有屎又有尿啊嘛。咁嗰啲屎裏邊咧就係查到咧，佢係可以帶呢個病毒嗰啲遺體喺個屎糞便裏邊嘅。咁於是咧就係即係我哋知道係喺糞便裏邊係有呢個病毒咯。
Okay, so there are 3 major diagnostic tests we can use. The first one and the most sensitive is the nucleic acid amplification or PCR test. This one will mainly use upper respiratory specimens, so the nasal swabs we all know and love, although you can also use the lower respiratory samples. And it has both high sensitivity and specificity, and it takes anywhere from 15 minutes to 8 hours to do. Second, we have the rapid antigen tests, and this can also diagnose active COVID, but it's not as good. The sensitivity is 50 to 80% if you have symptoms, but only 30 to 60% if you don't have any symptoms. And this one mainly uses those nasal or nasopharyngeal swabs and takes anywhere from 50 minutes to 2 hours. And then lastly, number 3, we have the serologic test. And this just measures your blood to see if you've got anti-COVID virus antibodies present. And this can let us know if you've had past infection or if you've had current infection, but the symptoms have been going on for at least 3 to 4 weeks. And that's because the adaptive immune system, as we saw before, it takes a while for that antibody response to really ramp up. The sensitivity and specificity is very variable for this test. And there is a problem where you can get some false positives because of cross-reactivity with other coronaviruses. This test usually takes less than 1 hour.
咁咧就測試嚟講咧，我哋主要係有3種測試啦。2種咧就係查嗰個病毒嘅，一種咧就係查嗰個抗體嘅。咁查嗰個抗體咧，最拉尾嗰個咧就係即係你受咗感染啦，個身體做咗呢個免疫嘅功能去抵抗佢啦。增加呢個抗體去對抗呢個病毒啦 ，OK？ 咁所以咧，呢個抗體咧，如果係查到有呢個抗體咧，就證明你有感染過 ，OK？ 咁咧就通常咧就係要少少時間，個身體先會產生呢啲抗體，咁你先至可以驗到佢嘅存在。咁但係呢啲抗體咧，過咗幾個禮拜之後咧，就即係過咗一段時間啦，唔係幾個禮拜啦，過咗一段時間幾個月之後咧，就會消失嘅喎，即係唔係話啲抗體係會一路永遠都會查到話你曾經感染過，唔係喎，佢會消失，咁即係你即係未必一定查到如果太過耐咧，未必查到感染過嘅。但係如果係幾個月之內咧，應該係查到你係幾個月之內感染過嘅。咁另外嗰兩樣嘢咧，就係而家講得最多嘅啦，就係呢個用呢個核酸聚合酶鏈反應呢個 PCR test，OK， 或者係用呢個抗原嘅 test。呢個rapid antigen test 兩個 test 咧，最主要嘅分別咧就係時間啊，一個咧就要成大半日先至驗到嘅，另外一個咧就係即刻15分鐘、20分鐘咧就睇到個結果噶啦。咁所以而家咧喺個病情犀利嘅時候咧，即係呢個因為呢個 Omicron 傳染得好快噶嘛， 佢傳染得快嘅時候，你如果要等幾日喎，你先等到嗰個結果喎，咁中間你可以周圍走，你可以傳染好多人噶嘛。咁所以咧，呢個PCR test 雖然佢係準，但係咧喺時間上面咧，佢就真係失效啦。如果係要佢嚟防止抗疫嘅話，但係呢個 antigen test 咧，佢係冇咁準。但係當佢查到你係陽性嘅時候咧，係非常之準嘅喎，因為佢咧最叻咧就係當你係傳染性最高嘅時候，佢嘅準確性係非常之高嘅。所以咧，呢個rapid antigen test 咧就係第二點嗰度咧，佢咧就係話佢就係冇咁準啦，但係咧佢因為佢快啊嘛，其實佢呢度寫15分鐘至2小時，但係大部分都係15分鐘、20分鐘就查到㗎啦。咁你查到你即刻知道自己係真係感染咗嘅，真係陽性嘅話，你咪即刻可以做感染啦。你唔使等幾日，跟住去染咗好多人啊嘛。所以呢個第二嗰個 test 咧，喺而家抗疫嘅疫情之中咧，係一個非常非常之重要嘅 test。所以政府派咁多俾我哋咯。OK，因為知道我哋好多時都唔肯自己買或者買唔到啦嘛，咁佢咪派俾我哋咯。而家我哋免費每人每個地址應該有4盒係咪？然後自己嘅驗疏又可以。每個受保者咧都可以去每個月攞8盒嘅，咁呢個咧就係俾你時常去測試，時常去睇下自己有冇陽性。OK， 如果有陽性咧就唔好出街，喺屋企嗰度就唔好周圍走感染人，就係咁嘅意思咯。
Okay, for prevention, I won't belabor this point because we all know this way too well by now, I think. But really, 3 big things will be number 1, masks, and then second will be personal preventive measures, things like a lot of good hand washing, respiratory hygiene, social distancing when appropriate, and then thirdly, vaccines.
咁呢個咧就係預防。我哋有咩方法預防咧？預防最重要就係打針、打疫苗。打咗疫苗咧，我哋就算感染咗啊，都唔會大病啊嘛，係咪？咁啊，首先保護咗自己。咁呢個疫苗咧，亦都可以係減低呢個傳播嘅風險嘅。佢雖然唔係完全可以阻止傳播，但係佢係減低佢個傳播嗰個度量啊。咁跟住咧就係口罩啦。口罩咧，戴口罩而家因為呢個 Omicron 感染得咁犀利咧，我哋係要戴。如果係要戴嘅話咧，好多時咧係要戴嗰啲 N95啊嗰種口罩嘅，或者係要戴2個口罩嘅。咁其實一個好重要嘅關鍵咧，就係呢個隔離啊。呢個隔離咧就係如果我哋係感染犀利嘅時候咧，風險高嘅時候就出少啲街咯，係咪？如果你唔出街嘅，你咪感染唔到咯。所以呢個係一個非常之重要嘅環節啦。但係即係好多人都唔會故意蓄意咁去唔出街啦。但係你係如果係冇必要嘅話，你覺得係有風險高嘅話，你係可以唔出街，呢個係你嘅選擇嚟㗎。
Okay, in terms of masks, we know that masks work, and they're associated with a 53% lower incidence of COVID in one study. And there's a difference in quality of masks, the N95 or KN95 or the KF94s. These are the best. They're better than the disposable medical surgical masks, which are better than the cloth masks. But ultimately, the best mask is one that you wear properly. And so just the picture on the right, we all see the people who walk around with a mask around their chin, and we all know that doesn't really do anything. So, if you're going to wear a mask, then, wear it correctly, put it on your nose and your mouth.
咁你見到嗰幾幅圖咧，戴嗰啲口罩真係好笑啊！頭上面嗰2幅咧就啱嘅，下邊嗰2幅你睇見嗰個口罩跌咗落嚟個鼻哥下邊嗰度，有啲連個跌到落去下巴嗰度，咁嗰啲好顯明係戴得唔啱啦。所以戴口罩唔止係個口罩嘅問題，係你戴法亦都非常之重要。咁啊，當然大家知道到而家呢個時候，大家都知道 N95啊、KN95、KF95嗰啲就係比較好過其他嗰啲口罩啦，係咪啊？比個布口罩好啦。咁KN 咧就大陸出嘅嗰啲口罩 ，KF 咧就係韓國出嘅 ，N95咧就係美國出嘅，呢個就有分別啦。
All right, so for vaccines, so Diana already talked about this sort of new exciting vaccine that is hopefully going to be ready for us soon. But for the US right now, we really have 3 main vaccines available. The Pfizer and Moderna are both mRNA vaccines. And they're quite similar. The Pfizer approved all the way down to 5 years of age. The Moderna approved for 18 and up. And then we've got the Janssen, which is going to be a kind of a more traditional adenovirus vector vaccine, so more like other vaccines we've known. And this is going to be for 18 and up. And kind of the big change over the last several months has been the importance we now see because of Omicron of getting boosters really for all three of these different vaccines.
咁喺美國嚟講咧，其實有一個 vaccine 係冇寫低嘅，就係除咗呢三個之外咧，有第四個嘅，嗰就係 Novavirus 啊。So Novavirus is also approved here, right?
Oh, yes. I think, yes, I guess I just focused on the big, most common ones here, though.
Yeah. Novavirus was recently approved. But anyways, 最低限度而家重要嘅就係用三個啦，係咪？一個咧就係輝瑞啦，一個咧就係莫德納啦。咁啊，輝瑞啊，世界好多地方都有噶啦，莫德納比較係少啲嘅。咁咧就Johnson and Johnson 就係 Johnson and Johnson 嗰個藥廠叫做 Johnson。Johnson and Johnson 嘅藥廠叫做 Janssen， 其實係 Johnson and Johnson 嘅一個分支嚟嘅。咁咧就即係最主要係呢三種嘅疫苗啦。普遍嚟講咧，你而家打邊個疫苗咧都係差唔多噶啦。OK， 即係個功效啊係如果係要嚟打加強劑咧，亦都可以溝針嘅，係唔需要話打開輝瑞就打輝瑞，打開輝瑞要換個 Moderna 或者換個 Janssen 都得嘅。咁就總之你去邊度打針，佢有咩嘢你就打乜咯，即係唔需要去研究佢邊個好啲，邊個唔好啲咁噶。
Okay, in terms of which vaccine to choose, ultimately they're all pretty good, but there is a slight preference for the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna, because of a little bit better risk-benefit profile. The Janssen vaccine has been associated with a little bit of thrombosis, clots, with thrombocytopenia and possibly Guillain-Barré syndrome. And there's some slight incidence of myocarditis with the mRNA vaccines. But the risk of all of these events is extremely, extremely small. And in any kind of risk-benefit analysis, the benefits of all of the vaccines outweighs the risks. And in terms of their efficacy, we know that 3 doses for the vaccines on average is close to about 95% effective versus hospitalization from Delta, and not quite as effective versus Omicron, but still 90% is pretty good.
咁呢個繼續講呢個疫苗啦，咁啊大家都知道打疫苗非常之重要啦，所以其實最重要咧就係講，雖然呢個疫苗啊係引起身體嘅免疫功能係會好似有啲症狀出嚟咁。嗰啲唔係副作用嚟嘅，嗰啲係嗰啲免疫功能嗰啲症狀嚟嘅。即係你如果係有免疫功能咧，佢係會有啲症狀，可能發燒啊，可能係發燒係最多㗎啦，咁或者有時係傷風鼻塞嗰啲啦嚇。咁咧呢啲咁嘅免疫功能嘅反應咧，係遠遠咧係比感染咗呢個病毒係好嘅。I want to ask you a question actually right here, Dr. Choo, before I forget. Because it's always in my mind. So, some people have a lot of reactions to taking the vaccines and some people don't. They have very mild reactions. And so does it mean that, and we know that these reactions are really a signal that our body's immune system is responding to the vaccine. So does it mean that if the reactions are less, let's say that, well, I actually did not have any reactions when I took the first and second doses, right? So if you don't have much reaction, does it mean that your immune system is not as strong?
I think not necessarily so by any means. Many people have asked me that question and been afraid, saying, "Oh, does this mean the vaccine won't work for me because I felt absolutely nothing?" I think we really don't see any kind of distinct correlation there. It might, in some ways, maybe be reassuring if you have a strong response to the vaccine, because maybe you feel like, okay, my immune system really got triggered and it's really ready to fight it the next time I see it. But in general, I think we see where some people will have very like kind of not that bad issues, say with the third booster dose, and then they had a very much stronger seeming reaction on the second dose. but we know that their third booster dose should have boosted their immune response much more. So I would say that we can't necessarily make a one-to-one correlation on that.
咁我正話咧就問朱醫生咧就係話有啲人咧你知咧有啲人打咗針咧好大反應㗎嘛，有啲人咧打咗針咧好似冇事咁嘅喎，咁咧咁我就話咁呢個反應咧就係會唔會反映我哋嘅免疫功能嘅強同埋弱咧？即係你如果個反應大就即係話啊你個免疫功能好強啦，睇下個反應幾大咁啊。咁如果你嘅免疫功能係弱嘅咧，咁咧就話所以打咗針都冇咩反應㗎咁樣，即係冇咩即係發燒啊，我咩都冇乜事㗎，係個針口有少少痛㗎咋咁。咁佢咧就話咁我哋睇到咧最容易睇到咧就係打第三針嘅時候咧，咁咧我哋知道打咗第三針嘅時候咧，第三針咧係可以將我哋嘅免疫功能係提高好多噶嘛，提高到咩情況咧？就係打第三針最拉尾嗰點咧，就係話95% 係有效嘅，對呢個減低入醫院同埋得到好嚴重嘅感染嘅情況咧，係好有效嘅對呢個 Delta。咁啊，就算對 Omicron 呢個可以即係避開免疫功能嘅病毒咧，佢都有90%嘅作用嘅。咁即係話咧，當你打第三針嘅時候，咁你諗下啦，如果你嘅身體嘅免疫功能如果係低嘅話，又點會得到呢啲咁嘅有效嘅功能咧？所以佢話咧，就應該係唔係1對1咁對比嘅，即係唔可以話你打咗針冇副作用咧，小副作用咧就冇即係唔係副作用係反應啊，小反應咧就即係話個免疫功能都低嘅，所以大家朋友唔需要擔心嚇。
Okay, and then this is just a picture showing just how much of an improvement we see with that third booster dose and why that third booster dose is important. So you see that it increases the protection against Omicron by about a factor of 25. And just real quickly, just before I forget, I saw a question in the chat asking about if we should be getting a fourth booster dose if it's been more than 5 months after our third booster dose. It's not a general recommendation from the CDC yet, except really in some certain distinct populations, like if someone is immunocompromised. They will potentially change that later on down the road, but for right now, we're sort of reserving a strong recommendation for a fourth dose for our immunocompromised patients.
咁咧就係話如果打兩針嘅時候咧，你睇嗰個藍色嗰條柱咧，藍色嗰度喺 Omicron 嗰條柱咧就係個效用好低下嘅，因為個 Omicron 可以避開嗰啲疫苗啊。咁但係打咗第三針嘅時候咧，打咗加強劑嘅時候咧，咁就唔同啦。呢個第三針咧，佢咧就發覺係會增加25倍嘅防護功能嘅，咁所以打第三針咧係非常之重要。咁咧就正話就Dr. Choo 咧就答問題裏邊其中一條咧就係話使唔使打第四針啊？咁咧就係主要嚟講咧，佢話而家暫時未睇到有打第四針嘅需要嘅。但係咧有一部分特別嘅人士啊，嗰啲咩人士咧就係譬如有cancer 啊，咁佢嘅免疫能力咪低啲咯，因為佢可能係做緊化療啊、咩電療啊嗰啲啊嘛。咁或者有啲人咧就係換過啲腎臟啦、換肝啊、換肺啊咁啦。咁佢哋咧就成日都要食住一啲嗰啲減低嗰啲免疫功能嘅藥嘅，因為如果佢免疫功能太低咧，就會係排斥呢啲腎臟嘅。OK， 如果有腎臟移植嗰啲人咧，嗰個免疫功能係特別低嘅，係故意頂到咁低嘅，所以呢啲人咧就可能要打第四針。咁但係普通嚟講咧，我哋知道你嘅問題嘅，係因為睇到打完第三針之後咧，過咗幾個月之後咧，佢嗰啲抗體咧都一路低啊嘛。咁啊，既然低咗啦，過咗3-4個月，佢個抗體咁低啦，咁使唔使打第四針再補翻高啲佢啊？咁呢個就係大眾嘅問題。咁但係咧，你記住嗰個防疫措施嗰度啊，係唔止淨係個抗體噶嘛，仲有嗰啲 B cell、T cell 噶嘛。佢低咗嗰個 B cell 有個記憶，如果再啲病毒再入嚟嘅時候，佢又可以大發嗰個工廠嘅功能，就製造多啲抗體出嚟噶嘛。同埋如果係嗰個 T cell 咧，佢又可以去殺嗰啲感染咗嗰啲細胞噶嘛。咁呢個 B cell 同 T cell 咧都喺度嘅嗰啲記憶啊。所以咧，就算係而家你睇到個抗體係顯著咁樣低咗，但係並唔等於嗰個即係而家打咗個第三劑疫苗係冇功用嘅。所以而家暫時嚟講咧，嗰啲權威人士咧就話暫時唔需要驚住打第四劑住嘅，但係將來唔知 因為仲係未夠時間去睇到個情況，睇清楚個情況，將來可能要都唔定。咁你知啦，平時打感冒疫苗嗰啲都每年打㗎啦，係咪啊？所以我哋都其實見怪不怪。
Okay, in terms of treatment, and this is not something that people will encounter often, but we have one main medication for pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's pretty new. It's called Evusheld, and it's for people who either have a significant amount of immunocompromise or who had a very severe adverse vaccine reaction and so can't tolerate getting the vaccine again for whatever reason. When they get this, then they are protected against COVID for about 6 months. The second thing is going to be post-exposure prophylaxis. So after you've been exposed, you can receive, there are 2 different medications out there, one called Regen-CoV, and then another one, the bamlanivimab, atezolizumab, and these are for select groups as well, but unfortunately, neither is really effective versus Omicron, so they are at this point not very useful. And then I get a lot of questions, certainly, about other sorts of treatments that people see about, hear about, read about, like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, and unfortunately, the data is really just not showing that they are very effective at all for this.
咁呢個咧就係話到底而家呢個 treatment 嗰度有啲咩藥咧？咁啲藥咧就係有一隻藥咧就係喺個病毒之前預防嘅時候可以用嘅，呢個係個 monoclonal 嘅 antibody 嚟嘅。咁咧就係叫做咩啊？單克隆抗體組合嚇，咁咧就係2隻藥夾埋嘅，咁咧就係如果出現咗中度免疫損害或者嚴重嘅疫苗不良嘅反應嘅時候咧，咁就可以用嘅。咁但係至於對付 Omicron 嚟講咧，如果係感染咗之後啊，咁呢啲有而家用緊嗰啲呢2種藥咧。對 Omicron 嚟講係冇咩用嘅 ，OK。總之簡單啲嚟講咧，而家暫時咧喺藥方面咧係唔係幾即係除咗係嗰個輝瑞嗰隻藥咧，其他嗰啲藥咧都唔係好做得好好嘅 ，OK。嗰個 Merck 嗰隻藥咧都即係都可以有啲效果嘅，但係就冇輝瑞嗰隻咁好咯。輝瑞嗰隻叫做 Paxlovid， 但係呢兩隻咧。呢兩隻嚟講咧，就係個功用咧就唔係好大嘅。咁但係咧，功用大細都好啦。個問題就係你而家冇藥啊嘛，你而家係好多藥你都冇啊嘛，所以就冇咩用咯。即係你而家嗰啲藥唔係周圍都有噶嘛，美國可能多啲啦，但係你如果係亞洲啲咁嘅地方咧，係好多地方都買唔到呢啲藥嘅，因為佢供應唔夠啊。咁有一個咧就係好多人咧就話咁食維他命 D 啦。食維他命 C 啦，去補充翻啦，咁可以增加個免疫功能咯。正話你咪睇到嗰啲可以增加免疫功能嘅。咁但係而家咧就唔推薦嘅。So actually, I want to ask you, Dr. Choo, for this vitamin D. So for those of us who live in Seattle or live in those areas that's not a lot of sunshine, or even in San Francisco, we can get very foggy if you live in the area by the coast. So a lot of people actually have a vitamin D deficiency. We know that, if you go out for the sun and all that, you get a lot of vitamin D manufactured, right? But if there's not a lot of sun exposure, and a lot of people are staying home, not going out these days, there might be vitamin D deficiencies that are undetected because they didn't go for a blood work. So would you recommend people to get it checked out for the vitamin D level? And if low, then take some supplements for it?
Yes, I think so vitamin D deficiency is extremely common because people are very skin cancer savvy. And so I would say that as part of the annual physical, a lot of times people should get a vitamin D level checked oftentimes. And so it would be important to get that supplemented if you are low, certainly not just for COVID, but for long-term bone health and for osteopenia, osteoporosis prevention.
咁呢個咧就係嗰隻 ivermectin 嗰隻咧，就係嗰隻馬牛啊羊啊嗰啲嚟到打針係要嚟防衛嗰啲寄生蟲嘅藥嚟嘅。咁啊呢啲寄生蟲嘅藥咧，曾經有人話咧就係打喺人嗰度咧都可以防 COVID 嘅咁，但係實在嗰啲數據係唔足夠去咁講咯。咁呢個hydroxychloroquine呢隻藥咧，呢個氫氣龜啊，咁呢隻藥咧就係嗰陣時Trump總統咧就係哇死都話呢隻藥好有效啊，佢都係用呢隻藥噶咁。但係咧其實呢隻藥後尾嗰啲實驗嘅數據出嚟都係又係話即係冇用嘅。咁至於維他命 D 咧，咁就各位朋友咧就可能要小心啲啦，因為維他命 D 咧係應該係我哋每年去做身體檢查去驗血嘅時候咧，都應該驗一驗嘅。因為好多人咧係有維他命 D 嘅不足啊，而唔知道嘅。你唔驗咧你就唔知啦。因為維他命 D 對我哋身體其他嘅功能啊，啲骨骼嘅健康啊，都好重要噶嘛。但係因為好多人啊，聽到醫生講話唔好曬咁多太陽啊，因為曬太陽咧會生皮膚癌啊咁。咁好多人咧就一來咧就咁樣聽咗就唔想曬太陽啦，二來咧就因為呢個 COVID 嘅疫情自己都唔想出街啦，咁就所以根本係少咗出街，少咗曬太陽嘅。咁所以大家咧，如果你係跟住去做呢個身體檢查嘅時候，年度嘅身體檢查嘅時候，記住提醫生去查一查你嘅維他命 D 啦，睇下有冇減低到，咁然後做啲補充啊嚇。
All right, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
So from this first question from Ray, the People's Republic of China seems to have lower COVID rates, and why is that? And I think that question, I think that's exactly correct. Given the kind of government measures they can enforce, which certainly can't be done in a country like the United States, they enforce incredibly strict quarantining, social distancing mandates, putting entire cities on lockdown, just measures that would be just unpalatable for most Western democracies. And so that is certainly, it's effective, but of course, not feasible for most countries. I think China is probably one of the only countries that could really do something like that. And next, in terms of, do we worry about massive use of sanitizer over the past 2 years? I think, it's certainly something that does bear some thinking if over time, if we're going to be potentially breeding things like potentially having more resistance out there. I would say that for now, we're not too worried about it, but I think certainly like many things, like when we think about antibiotic overuse, that is a concern potentially that could happen down the road. Next, the anonymous attendee asking, could you discuss how symptoms might be different for older adults? That's a great question. And I think certainly this is something that could be, older adults will have a little bit less of a cushion. And so there could be something that would be a little bit easier for them to develop, but certainly the more severe symptoms. And certainly we know that the older someone is, then potentially the higher chance to have more of those severe complications, like the lower respiratory symptoms and that sort of thing. Although once again, with vaccination and thankfully with Omicron, it's going to be less of a chance of that. This next question here from Xu Ping. I got one shot of the J&J vaccine, then Moderna as the booster. Should I get one more booster? Because Moderna's booster shot is only half a dose. So yes, so that's a great question. And people have oftentimes asked about what the utility is of sort of mixing and matching. And overall, the data actually is good. And maybe in some cases might suggest it might even be better if you have a vaccine like the Janssen vaccine, and then maybe have the mRNA one like the Moderna. If you are going to get another booster, I think the Moderna booster is just fine. That's probably what I would do. Even if it's only half the dose, I still think that would be pretty appropriate. And then next question here from Gordon, does antibody really thicken the blood? She and I argued back and forth that antibody couldn't be detected after a while, but per research, IgG is supposed to last years. And you want an indication of whether or not you were ever infected. And thinking was if antibody did last long, it would cause problems due to thickening of the blood. Okay, so that's a very interesting and nuanced question. Antibody is not going to thicken the blood unless someone has really some type of malignancy. So there are conditions, something called multiple myeloma, where people produce incredibly inappropriately huge amounts of antibody. And those problems, they can cause issues with the blood actually getting too sludgy, if you will. But that's not something that we will see in the general population. And your blood would never get too sludgy or too thick if you don't have that malignancy. It's not going to happen from vaccines. Over time, the vaccine antibody levels do decline, which is the whole reason why we have to get boosters. But the body's never going to get overloaded with antibodies and get too thick if you are a normal individual. So I wouldn't worry about that. And the next question also from Gordon, I guess a few questions. So if you take vitamin C, it's to give a better vaccine result. However, because vitamin C is anti-inflammatory, does that mean that you have no reaction because the vaccine is made less effective? Overall, vitamin C is going to be helpful. And I would say you're not having to worry that it's going to significantly, dramatically alter the vaccine efficacy. People have asked questions where they see maybe slight differences, even like if you were drinking alcohol around the time of your vaccine. But we have the vaccine's been given to millions and millions and millions of people at this point, and sort of very, very slight percentage differences, like 1%, one plus or minus, I think is not going to be a big difference in terms of how effective these vaccines are, which is very effective. And in terms of the research for the theoretical blood serum of level of vitamin D. So when they've done studies looking at giving vitamin D in situations where people have been infected with COVID, it unfortunately has not been overly optimistic. It doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. And so I wouldn't really, that's kind of the reason why vitamin D is not really a substitute as a treatment for COVID. It's great to take vitamin D, and it's good to have good levels of vitamin D, certainly. But it's not going to necessarily be a cure or prevent someone from getting COVID altogether. But in general, is it good to have sufficient vitamin D? Absolutely. Interesting note for Dr. Fauci taking a lot of vitamin D. All right. And then in terms of zinc, so zinc plays a role for, it's one of these essential sort of minerals that is necessary for the immune system. And it plays a role with the immune system for many things, but I'd say in terms of sorry, kind of losing the question here. So I would just say zinc is important, and in terms of, we do see that it helps in terms of many processes, including wound healing. And so I would encourage that people get adequate amounts of zinc, but no need to kind of, I think, try to go overboard with it. Other questions here. So many nutrition questions, I think. So vitamin B complex. Vitamin B is good for the immune system. And overall, I would say that it is something to also have sufficient amounts on. But the most important nutrients for the immune system, typically we think of as being vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. And vitamin B would be a little bit more secondary to that. Would it be safe to not take any vaccines for people who have never taken vaccines, not even a flu shot? Would it be safe to not take any vaccines? So, I mean, this is certainly, vaccines are going to be recommended, based out of medical science. As we've looked at the data, we know vaccines are going to be very, very important in terms of reducing the risk of severe complications from COVID. And so I would definitely encourage pretty much anyone to get a vaccine, and anonymous attending what's inside the vaccine. So those, as I mentioned, the vaccines are different. There's mRNA vaccines, there are adenovirus vector vaccines, sort of a little bit beyond the scope to be able to go into more detail. Certainly you could go and look at the vaccine data, and I encourage you to go to things like the cdc.gov website, and you can read much more in detail about the vaccine and get more information there.
So there's one Chinese question that actually says that he or she has taken 3 doses, meaning that there's a booster dose, and the health seems to be normal. And is there any need to do the rapid test at home?
I would say not to worry about doing the rapid test unless there's some kind of a reason to do so. Like if you, once again, the rapid test is not very, very good or sensitive if you don't have any symptoms. And so right immediately, I would say if you don't have any symptoms, I would probably not worry about it. if you've had exposure where you were around an individual you know had COVID and you were around them for a pretty extended period of time, then it may be something to think about, to maybe get it to check. But I wouldn't check it just because you are just curious.
咁朱醫生咧就即係話呢個快速測試咧就係咁嘅。你如果係冇症狀咧，你係唔需要做咯。但係如果你發覺你去過邊度，嗰度有人感染，你係呢個親密接觸者啊，因為係有其他問題，你覺得係有懷疑嘅咧，咁你咪去做咯。但係做咧就通常咧就係叫你5日之即係暴露咗5日之後先至做，因為你即刻做咧都係會係陰性嘅，因為個身體未有咁多病毒喺個身體嗰度俾佢查到出嚟，因為你要數量多佢先查得到啊嘛。咁所以咧你係等幾日，咁你中間嗰段時間你咪唔好去咁多街同少啲人接觸，自己避一避啦。即係假如間真係會變咗陽性嘅話，咁就喺咁嘅情形之下你可以做。Thank you so much, Dr. Choo. Very good questions. 好，問得好好啲問題嚇。咁首先咧，我哋就非常之多謝大家參加啦。咁咧就亦都係好多謝我哋嘅 Dr. Choo 啦，同埋 Clifford 同埋 Raymond 啦，係幫手嘅喺後邊幕後幫手。So we thank Dr. Choo and Clifford and Raymond for helping. For those of you who want to join the listserv so that you can receive my emails, you can write to me and just put down on the subject line, please add to listserv. And then we also have a website which we welcome you to go and browse around, and there's a lot of COVID information on there. 多謝各位參加，祝大家各位健康快樂，希望2022年會改變我哋嘅命運，將會更好。多謝大家參加，Thank you so much, everyone.